Keep in mind that you'll have to get it later anyway. And once we have executed our first code in Node, let's quickly cover the concept of globals or global variables in Node. And the emphasis is on the word quickly. Yes, there are more global variables available, but the idea is not to spend half an hour in Slideville. Instead, I would want to give you a general idea. And as we progress with the course, don't worry, we will implement them. And that way, you can right away see them in action, not just some random general description. And before we continue, let me just mention that throughout the tutorial, the code from the previous video, I'm going to save in a file. So for example, remember our first complex app with amount and all that. So what I did, I created a file name by the one hyphen intro.js, and then I just copy and paste it. And this is what I'm going to do throughout the Node tutorial part of the course. So that way you can always have access to the code. And if you ever need to, you can jog your memory. Now, if you don't want to use my one, if you're adding your own comments and all that, I would also suggest doing that. Where essentially just create a file, just dump it, and then that way you are slowly progressing on the course. And if you ever need to go back and refresh your memory, you always have that option. And keep in mind that if you would want to run this file, you simply go with node and then whatever the file name, right? So in my case, that would be one-intro.js. Again, I'm going to keep on numbering them because I'm just annoying that way, but you don't have to. That is really up to you. So back to the globals. When we work in vanilla JS applications, we know a very cool thing is the fact that we have access to the window object. And the reason why it's so cool, because in the window object, we can get a bunch of useful things, right? So for example, we can get a query selector. So I can select a node. I can get built-in fetch, and hopefully you get the gist. Now, I don't want to rain on your parade, but in Node, there's no window. Why? Well, because there's no browser. So there's no window object. So if you'll try to access window, Node will spit back the error, and most likely your app will crash. Now, there are some globals, of course. There is this concept of global variables. And essentially, what global variables means that anywhere in your application, you can access them. So no matter how complex my application gets, how nested it gets, or whatever, I'll always have access to those variables. And again, let me repeat, these are just some of the variables. Of course, there's more. And I'm not going to spend hours and hours talking about them. I simply want to give you a general idea. And then, like I said, we'll start using them and you'll see them in action. And in my opinion, that's just going to make it way clearer about what, in fact, they're doing. And some of the useful ones, we have their name. So that would be __ their name. Just going to give us path to current directory. Then we have also __ file name, which, as you can see, is going to give us a file name. Then we have require, which is a function to use modules, as well as the module that would be info about the current module. Now, these two, we'll literally cover them in the upcoming videos because our next big topic is going to be modules. So for the time being, just remember that we have require and module, and you'll see them in action in no time. And then we have a very, very, very useful one. And that one is a process. And why it's so useful? Because it gives us a info about the environment where the program is executed. Because we need to keep in mind, when it comes to a Node app, at the moment, yeah, we're executing that on our machines. But when you deploy, for example, your API, so for example, your server, right? Where is it sitting? It is sitting on DigitalOcean or Heroku or whatever. So that, of course, is already a different environment. And of course, based on that environment, you can make a bunch of decisions in your application. Again, if you'll take a look at the process right now, it's just going to be a giant object of gibberish data. But trust me, as we're progressing with the course, we'll find a bunch of useful properties that we'll implement in our application. Now, any of them, you can simply console log and you'll get that useful data. So you can just run console log and then, for example, their name. Again, I'm not going to console log all of them. Probably the biggest one is going to be the process. Like I said, you'll get a bunch of properties that at the moment will look like gibberish. And I simply need to save. And of course, then we go with node and app.js. We run that and there it is. Now, of course, this gives me the path. So if you're interested, of course, you can console log the rest of them as well. But in my case, I'm going to stop with their name. Now, also very quickly, yes, you have access to the console. So as you can see, in order to console log, we had to use the console. So that is also something that is available globally. Then just like in the vanilla.js, we have set interval as well as set timeout. So you can run these ones. And I'm not going to run both of them, but I'll show you set interval very quickly, just so you don't think that I'm cheating. And the way it's going to look like, of course, we have our callback function. And then I'll say that my interval is going to run every second. And I must type hello world. Otherwise, well, what kind of tutorial is this? And again, we simply go back to node and then app.js. And as you can see, now after every second, I have hello world in console. And in order to stop it, remember the command was Control and C. And before we move on and start talking about the modules, let me also mention something else, where essentially we don't need to type node and then app.js. You can simply write node and then app. However, throughout the course, I'll probably keep on typing JS just because I'm annoying. That would be the first thing. Now, the second thing, and this is not a node thing, this is actually a terminal. If you don't want to type it, you can simply go back to the previous command. And in order to do that, you need to press on arrow key up and check it out. The moment you press, notice that was my previous command, and then I have one before that. So in my case, that is node and then app.js. Again, you don't need to add that JS extension, but probably I will. And then you just go back to the previous command and then press, and again, you just execute that command. And of course, if you would want to clear the console, again, this is not a node thing, this is a terminal. I just type clear. And lastly, to answer the question that's probably bugging you the most, do we always have to just type node and then the file name? Because as we're going to be testing, especially in tutorial, it will probably get annoying. And the answer is yes, but only for now. Once we learn about NPM, the external packages, which at the moment I fully understand doesn't make any sense at all, then there's command that effectively will restart our application. So we'll have to install some third-party module, some external library, and that will do the job of restarting the application. For now, yes, all throughout tutorial, up until the point where we cover that external library and external libraries in general, yes, we'll have to type node and then whatever is the file name. I know it's a little bit annoying, but I just don't want to skip ahead. I want to get us there with a full information of what is happening. So with this in place, with clear understanding of the global variables in Node, now let's move on to our next topic, which is going to be modules in Node. Beautiful. And once we understand the globals in Node, now let's talk about the modules. And first, let's return to this command. Notice we have here node and then app.js. And probably the question that you have is, well, does that mean that all my application needs to be in this one file? And the answer again is yes and no. Yes, you'll execute one file, but you'll split your code in modules. Otherwise, that would be literally insane to jam all your code in one file. And effectively, I'll just show you with an extremely complex app And of course, extremely complex is in the air quotes right now. And you'll see why we'd want to use the modules in the first place. So in the next video, I'll give you official intro with a bunch of gibberish and all that. But for the time being, let's just build super complex app and then see why we would want to use those modules in the first place. And if you have any familiarity with ES6 modules, if you have worked with them in Vanilla.js or in React.js, you're already in good shape. The syntax is going to be tiny bit different because Node uses CommonJS, but the general idea is exactly the same. And we start with a simple function by the name of say hi, you guessed it. And then this function is going to be looking for the name parameter. And then inside of the function, what do? We simply console log and we say hello there. And then whatever is the name of the dude or the gal that is being passed in as a parameter. And of course, we can invoke it and I can say hi, and then pass in Susan, for example. And in order to make this interesting, I'll set up some variables as well. So I'm going to say const John is equal to John. And you guessed it, since there's a John, there also has to be a Peter. And hopefully you get the gist. So imagine we would have a bunch of names, and then we have probably more functions than this one, but for the time being, this is just going to be say hi. We copy and paste. We invoke this function, I guess, 3 times. One for Johnny boy, one for Peter, and then the first one we already have for Susan. And what do? We run node app or app.js. We run that, and there it is. Now, of course, in our console, we can clearly see hello there, Susan, blah, blah, blah. Now, wouldn't it make sense if the names would be separate as well as this function or the future functions that we're going to create would be in separate files, and then we can access them all throughout the application. And that way, of course, we would have smaller files and more structure to our application. And that is exactly what the modules allow us to do.